and happy Halloween. It's your media specialist, Mrs. Baker, and my dog, Reese, here to share one of our favorite aspects of Halloween, the spooky story. I have always loved scary stories. I think the origin of my interest lies in my childhood. My dad liked to tell my brother, sister, and me scary stories that have stayed with us well into our adult lives. My mom was and still is an avid reader and read many and varied types of books, mainly nonfiction, but she also loved classic literature, and I vividly remember watching movie versions of Edgar Allan Poe's short stories as a child and being very frightened by them. When I was in the 7th grade, I read my very first Poe story in language arts. It was The Telltale Heart, and I was then hooked on Poe. Since that first reading, I have extended my knowledge of Poe greatly through my high school and college studies. As a high school American literature teacher, I had the opportunity to teach Poe's works, including The Pit and the Pendulum, The Fall of the House of Usher, and The Raven. I imagine I will always be fascinated with Poe's work because it was original, truly like none other before him. Today's writers continue to draw inspiration from Poe's literary works more than 160 years after his death. I hope you enjoy the brief video clip from Georgia Public Broadcasting titled Tales of Great Books, Edgar Allan Poe, and that it piques your interest in this significant American author. Be sure to stop by the Media Center to check out a collection of Poe's stories or to find further information about his life.
Consider this before viewing great books, Tales of Edgar Allan Poe. Think of a time when you were truly scared. Was the source of your fear real or imagined? Consider the causes of fear and its effects on the mind and body. As you watch the program, think about the events in Edgar Allan Poe's life that made him an expert on this part of human nature and helped him create his terrifying tales. Assignment Discovery now presents Great Books, Tales of Edgar Allan Poe.
Fear. It haunts each and every one of us. But one man lived a life so full of mortal terror. He created nightmares which refuse to die. Edgar Allan Poe dug into his own soul to write about the horror that touches each and every one of us. He created a Bible of fear.
Fear is the great black cup of coffee to human existence. If you have fear, then you're aware that you are vulnerable and you can do something about it, perhaps. If you don't have fear, you're going to walk out in front of the saber-toothed tiger, in front of the Mack truck, and not be around for very long.
Edgar Allan Poe is the most psychological writer that ever lived. Yeah, there is nothing of his that he wrote that doesn't have a chord in you somewhere. He has a tuning fork, and he hits it, and your whole soul vibrates.
Edgar Allan Poe's tales of terror were born out of a life filled with tragedy. And he used his suffering to create some of the most potent horror stories ever written. One of the most powerful tales is The Pit and the Pendulum. It is Poe's greatest portrait of mortal terror. A political prisoner of the Inquisition lies alone in a dungeon. He is wretched and confused. His death is certain. How he will die remains a mystery.
I dreaded the first glance at objects around me. It was not that I feared to look upon things horrible, but that I grew aghast, lest there should be nothing to see. The intensity of the darkness seemed to oppress and stifle me.
The terror in the Pit and the Pendulum is, as he says, not that there might be something to see, but that there is nothing to see. And I think that the Pit and the Pendulum is so awful and such a great representation of utter terror because it is a portrayal of what would happen if you had no stimulation, nothing. Then your mind would take over, and the mind would create monsters far more gruesome than anything that the Inquisition could possibly invent.
The victim feels his way through the darkness and stumbles. A fathomless pit filled with unimaginable horrors lies before him. He barely avoids its grasp. The victim drinks from a pitcher of water and falls into a drugged stupor. When he awakens, he's bound head to toe. High above him swings a pendulum, its arc of razor-sharp steel. With each sweep, it slowly descends, its blade coming ever closer to his heart.
You have this overwhelming force coming towards the body, a blade. Blades are so frequently used in horror films because they are specifically about opening that little thin case of the human body. It is also a vast or a huge symbol of a clock itself. So it's like your own death moving towards you, which is something we all are aware of.
I counted the rushing vibrations of the steel, inch by inch. Line by line, down and still down it came. I grew frantically mad and struggled to force myself upward against the sweep of the fearful scimitar. And then I fell suddenly calm and lay smiling at the glittering death as a child at some rare bauble.
With the blade inches from his chest, the victim sees a ray of hope. It appears in the form of a rat. He rubs morsels of food on the ropes that bind him. The rats begin to gnaw.
They writhed upon my throat. Their cold lips sought my own.
The rats chew through the ropes. He is free. But before he can catch his breath, his cell assumes a ghastly glow. The walls and ceilings are on fire, forcing him toward the dreaded pit. Just when all hope is lost, the fiery wolves rush back. The prisoner is liberated. His jailers are overthrown.
So you can imagine that maybe he was sleeping and he's awakening from a dream. But the worst horror would be that he's actually gone mad and that he is lost forever. Because the awakening could be really the fall into the abyss.
This story expresses in the most graphic and direct ways the most profound human anxieties about all of those forces that threaten us that could possibly lead to our annihilation. It's a cornucopia of frightening images. In some ways, it's a sort of tour de force. It seems as if Poe, in this one story, wants to pull out all the stops to see if he can invent or bring into play as many frightening devices as he can possibly imagine. It's a psychic overload.
Poe's tales of terror have been read by millions, but his fears were very much his own. Edgar Poe was born in 1809 to David and Eliza Poe, traveling actors. His mother was one of the best-known actors on the American stage, but the family lived in poverty. When Edgar was 2, his alcoholic father abandoned the family. His mother, Eliza, was left with nothing but the 2 children. Poverty took its toll. Young Eliza came down with tuberculosis, and after a lengthy disease, she died. Eliza Poe was just 24. Edgar was 3 years old.
In Poe's case, both his parents died early, and his father was an alcoholic and a failure, setting up a kind of pattern that Poe deliberately or unintentionally would follow throughout his life.
Young Edgar is taken in by a wealthy Scotsman in Richmond, Virginia, John Allan. It's a new life, full of luxury. The childless Mrs. Frances Allan takes the boy on as her very own.
The Allans never formally adopted Poe, and he resented that. He always wanted to take over the Allan name. He never felt comfortable with it. We call him Edgar Allan Poe, but he only went so far as to call himself Edgar A. Poe. I mean, suggesting that he both wanted the name, but really felt that it didn't belong to him. It was only after Poe's death that he began to be called Edgar Allan Poe.
Poe's relationship to his foster mother, Frances, was close but short-lived. When Edgar was 20, she died of TB.
Poe began to see himself as a kind of cursed figure, someone who actually brought misfortune on, especially women he loved. And all of this produces in Poe's work a kind of brooding awareness of mortality.
From the beginning, death haunted Poe. His life primed him to understand our most basic emotions, and his writing forces us to face them head-on. At the age of 27, left by his father, bereft by the deaths of his mother and foster mother, Edgar Allan Poe creates his own family. While staying with his aunt in Baltimore, he falls in love with her daughter, Virginia, his first cousin. When they marry, she is 13 years old. Poe worked as a critic and editor to support his new family. but his scathing reviews and erratic behavior created crisis after crisis.
Poe destroyed his own chances again and again for literary opportunities through bad luck, through poor judgment, through unfortunate timing. Again and again in Poe's life, there are moments when Poe seems just on the verge of becoming a truly successful writer in an American sense, and the bottom falls out.
Poe uses the last of his savings to buy a piano for his beloved wife Virginia. One day, as she performs for her husband and mother, she begins to cough. It's the first sign of a disease that plagued Poe throughout his life and infected all those he loved. Virginia has TB. For the next 5 years, Virginia would waste away from the dreaded disease. The only ray of light was a poem Poe wrote while Virginia lay desperately ill. The Raven. It's a poem about a man's obsession for a love lost to death. It was an immediate success.
The Raven was the first really big hit. It was something like, the Beatles' first song or something. It was enormously catchy. People apparently loved the way it sounded and the way it tripped along, and started imitating it all over the place.
Today, Poe's very name has become synonymous with the Raven. But even Poe's greatest success couldn't rescue him from poverty.
He struggled with poverty throughout his adult life. It's amazing how many of Poe's letters actually include requests for money. He did this again and again to friends. I'm needing $25. Can you possibly spare me some money?
On January 30th, 1847, Edgar Allan Poe's wife, Virginia, died of tuberculosis. She was 24 years old. She died at the same age and of the same disease as Poe's mother. One of Poe's most famous stories, The Telltale Heart, reads like his nightmarish hallucinations. The tale opens with the young caretaker of an elderly man is obsessed with the old man's eye.
True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so, by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man.
I think what sets The Telltale Heart apart and makes it particularly chilling is the way that Poe stages the story from the perspective of the killer and allows us to see that there's an absolute disconnect here between the narrator's intelligence, his intellect, his ability to organize a crime, and any human sentiment that might accompany the action. There is none.
Night enters the old man's room, but his eye is closed.
And so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye.
One night, as he opens the door, a noise awakens the old man.
I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror.
He can hear the beating of the old man's heart. He can hear his terror.
I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. The old man was dead. Yes, he was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more.
The young man cuts up the corpse, buries the body parts of the old man beneath his bedroom floor. He washes all traces of blood from his hands and from his clothes. In the middle of the night, police officers knock at the door. A scream has been heard. The police are investigating. The young man invites them in for tea and seats them over the floor where he's buried the body of the old man.
I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own, in a dream. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease.
It's a fascinating moment at the end of The Telltale Heart when the narrator is inviting the police inside and proceeds to sit down with them and very calmly discuss the situation. He feels as if he has nothing to lose, and in fact, there's a kind of quiet triumph that he enjoys there. He believes he's committed the perfect crime, and he flaunts it by behaving in this completely casual way with the police.
But before long, his head begins to ache. He hears a ringing in his ears.
It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton, and yet the officers heard it not. Why would they not be gone?
The heart is one of the few things about our body that announces that it's there. Mostly we're not really aware too much of what our interior is up to. The heart, you can hear, you can feel it. It's like a clock.
Was it possible they heard not? No, they hear. They suspected. They knew.
There's this perverse quality again and again in Poe's tales. It's no good to create a perfect crime if someone doesn't know about it. There's something within that has to get out.
I felt that I must scream or die. Villains, I shrieked! I admit the deed! Tear up the planks! Here! Here! It is the beating of his hideous heart!
And I think that's the terror that Poe's tales also leave us with, that no matter what you do, once you have seen or thought something horrible, there will always be ways for it to return. Things never die in Poe.
Keep watching. Discussion topics and activity and resources for great books, Tales of Edgar Allan Poe, are up next on Assignment Discovery. Now that you've seen great books, Tales of Edgar Allan Poe, talk about this. According to the program, death haunted Poe, and he saw himself as cursed. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? Using the events of his life as evidence, support your argument. How did the events of his life affect his writing? Now try this. Choose an author of horror stories writing today, like R.L. Stine or Stephen King. Make a Venn diagram to compare this author's use of symbolism with Poe's. For videos, CD-ROMs, lesson plans, and teacher resources on this topic and more, log on to discoveryschool.com. To learn more, Assignment Discovery suggests Edgar Allan Poe by Raphael Tilton.